Hey there, Reylo fam. This is Jungle Jenna with another installment of Confessions of a Trashy Reylo Shipper. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about something that's pretty near and dear to the Reylo fandom, and that is the possibility of Kylo Ren's redemption. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to be going into a lot of the evidence that supports this discussion. I'm going to be talking more about my thoughts in regard to what has been discussed and chipping in my own 2 cents more or less. While the discussion of Kylo Ren's possible redemption is relatively widespread throughout the Star Wars fandom, what's unique about this discussion within the Reylo community is that Reylo shippers believe Rey will have a very significant, if not the most significant role in bringing Ben back to the light side. And while I definitely agree that Rey will play a very significant role, and that's something I will definitely discuss later on in the video, I actually think that Ben's relationship with his father, Han, is going to play a much more significant role in that transformation. Before I launch into all of the gory details of this video, I just want to say that, as always, I completely respect other people's viewpoints on this discussion. One of the things that I love about this topic is that there's so much possibility, and everyone has something interesting and insightful to share about it. So yeah, if you find yourself, after watching this video, you want to chip in your 2 cents and share your thoughts on the topic, then feel free to do so, because so far I've had really great comments on my Reylo videos, and it's amazing for me as someone who's creating these videos to see that discussion take place in the comment section. I'm not exactly sure what a redemption arc would look like for Kylo Ren, but I definitely think that he'll develop in a way that will push himself away from the First Order and the dark side. Personally, I believe that Kylo Ren, Finn, and Rey are that they formed the new trio of the sequel trilogy. One thing that they all have in common is this underdeveloped sense of identity. And you see this especially with Kylo Ren because he's fashioned himself in the image of his grandfather, Darth Vader. Under the guise of Kylo Ren, Ben Solo is trying to live up to the legacy of his family while also paving his own way. But in many ways, he doesn't really accept himself just as he is. And you see this with his approach to the Force, how he's trying to push himself further to the dark side despite the fact that he is a perfect balance of both the light and the dark. The emotional anguish that he expresses in The Force Awakens, to me, seems to come more from, it's not, to me, like, it doesn't come across to me that he's necessarily conflicted because he's drawn to the light side. He's conflicted because he's trying to squash the light, when really that's an essential part of who he is. We don't know tons about Ben's backstory, but what we do know is that before Ben was even born, Snoke sensed that he was this perfect blend of the dark and the light, and one day he would grow up to be this, powerful Force user. So instead of waiting to contend with him later, he began preying on Ben from a young age. It's like that old saying of, keep your friends close but your enemies closer. Ben was especially susceptible to Snoke's influence because, Han and Leia had a volatile relationship, and, different things going on in the galaxy, demanding his parents' attention, left Ben in a position where he was alone, and he felt abandoned, rejected, and misunderstood. I think ultimately Ben is going to not necessarily go fully towards the dark or the light. He's going to be more gray, and kind of pave a new way for future generations of Jedi, or not necessarily Jedi, but just Force users in general. But I think that before he does that, part of his journey is going to involve overthrowing the false father figure of Snoke and embracing the true one of Han. Something that I find really interesting about Kylo Ren's relationship with Snoke is that it resembles more of a hero-villain dynamic. Here with Snoke, we have this much older, more experienced character who's very paranoid about losing his power. I remember reading an article that talked about Kylo Ren. I think it was an article that, they went into detail about the sound engineering, and Kylo Ren's lightsaber, and his force noises, all that good stuff. But I remember there was a part of the article that mentioned that they wanted Kylo Ren to come across as having been trained poorly, which I thought was really interesting. And I know that there are people who, when they did see The Force Awakens, they noticed that Kylo Ren's fighting style was very different, and that there were just things about him overall that, that didn't fall in line with like a typical Sith Lord or whatever. And obviously at this point we know that Kylo Ren is a Ren and not a Sith. But anyway, I'm digressing. The point is that I think that Snoke is this false father figure in the sense that he's kind of filling that void, where Han, should be, but instead of actually guiding him and encouraging him to be at his full potential, he's leading Kylo Ren to make decisions that will further weaken him and eventually put him in a position where he can easily be crushed by Snoke. I think this is evident in how Snoke has spoon-fed Kylo Ren the story about how Darth Vader, out of weakness, sacrificed his life for Luke. So Kylo Ren is aware of, the nature of his grandfather's death and how he was redeemed in the end, or that he went back to the light. But instead of looking at this as a sign of strength, he looks at Darth Vader's sacrifice as being one of weakness. Even though Kylo Ren is this balance of both the light and the dark, I think that his tendency for compassion is very strong, and we see this represented in The Force Awakens many times. We see him show compassion towards Finn on the battlefield or in the village. We see him show compassion for Rey. We see the love and attachment he still has towards his family. But I think that Ben sees this as being a weakness. He views this tendency for compassion as being something that holds him back. And he even expresses to Han, before Han's death, that he was once weak and foolish like his father, but then he destroyed that person. The problem is that the further Ben tries to push himself away from that tendency for compassion, the more problems he has. We see this with Han's death scene, because instead of feeling stronger like Snoke said he would, he actually felt weakened. But again, I think that this is all part of Snoke's plan. He's setting Kylo Ren up to fail, basically. I believe that Snoke has deliberately taught Kylo Ren to have this black and white perspective of the Force, so that instead of Kylo Ren learning to find balance between these conflicting sides of himself, he becomes locked into, constantly trying to push himself, or I guess I should say, it makes it so that Kylo Ren is always conflicted and experiencing emotional anguish, and feeling weak, etc., etc. It's hard to give a full evaluation of Kylo Ren's character because, in The Force Awakens, his agenda and motivation is not crystal clear. But I think it's pretty obvious that he has his own agenda. We don't know what that agenda is exactly, but I think that what we're seeing with Kylo Ren is that he's at a crossroads in his development as a person where he's beginning to develop an identity outside of Snoke and the First Order. And I think a lot of that conflict is pushing him, or I should say his internal conflict is pushing him to find solutions, to this almost kind of like this identity crisis. Also, I think that he's sensing changes in the Force, and being someone who values the Force, he's listening to those things. Throughout The Force Awakens, Kylo Ren seems torn between acting in a way that will preserve Snoke's trust and faith in him, and then acting out of personal interest. Even when Kylo Ren is acting in a way that will serve the First Order in some way, it's almost like this thinly disguised attempt at fulfilling his own agenda while making it appear that he's still loyal to the First Order. To me, this shows that Kylo Ren has a greater awareness of Snoke's agenda and the things that are going on within the First Order. It makes me think that there's a lot more going on in his head that we as audience members know at this point. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's not genuinely trying to push himself towards the dark side or trying to fulfill, trying to fulfill some sort of, trying to live up to his grandfather or whatever. But I think that his actions, because they are more strategic, it raises a few questions on my part as an audience member. Overall, I think that he's a balance between strategizing and keeping his personal interests hidden, but then he also is genuinely trying to figure out what his purpose is, and trying to resolve whatever conflict is taking place within him. Han's death scene was supposed to be the moment where Kylo Ren permanently bound himself to the dark side and became the true baddie of the sequel trilogy. Even in my first viewing of The Force Awakens, when this scene happened, I was like, Kylo Ren, you son of a bitch. In this moment, we see Kylo Ren stoop to his most base, most evil, violent level. This is the most evil thing that he will ever do in his life. But instead of this act strengthening him as Snoke promised it would, it actually weakens him. I think that Han's death scene, instead of it being the moment that Kylo Ren turns fully to the dark side, I think it will play a crucial role in his development as a character. I say that primarily because in this moment, Han finds it within himself to forgive his son and to reach out and caress Ben's face for the last time. In this moment, Han proves himself to be Ben's true father figure by demonstrating his unconditional love for his son. Han may have made mistakes as a parent, but he had the courage to own up to those mistakes and to try to reach out to Ben. And despite Ben's actions, he still loved his son. And this is going to contrast greatly with Snoke's behavior towards Kylo Ren, or Ben. And it's funny because I actually just thought of this, but if you think of Kylo Ren as being sort of the hero of his story, obviously he's not a typical hero, but if you think of his journey in terms of the hero's journey, here we have Han coming to him, basically, asking him to come home. And you could see this as, I guess, the hero's call to action. Obviously, Kylo Ren has had doubts about being a part of the First Order. He's probably even been tempted to leave at times, but has been afraid to do so because he's not sure of, whether or not he would be accepted or, what repercussions would follow those decisions. And with the hero's journey, the hero initially rejects the first call to action, but then they kind of have this awakening afterwards. Obviously, it's a bit more complex than that. I'm just kind of giving this very simplified explanation for it. But in a way, you can see how killing Han was rejecting this call to action. Also, too, I know that JJ has mentioned that it's really important to see what the Force is doing in this scene. And for a long time, I didn't completely understand what he was talking about until he did the commentary on the Blu-ray edition of The Force Awakens. But essentially, the Force is basically playing chess with, with the character of Kylo Ren and also with Rey. The Force in some ways has this say on, what happens, or it's guiding the characters along the path that they should be on. And in JJ's commentary on the Blu-ray edition, he said that initially Kylo Ren was actually considering leaving with Han and, leaving the First Order behind. But then the Force, the sun drains out and then, basically the dark side of the Force ends up overtaking Kylo Ren, and then he makes that decision to kill his father. And I'm not saying that that means that Kylo Ren was possessed um, and that he wasn't truly responsible for the death of his father. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. I'm more or less just saying that that Han's death plays a bigger role in the grand scheme of things, and that in some ways, according to the Force, his death was a part of the puzzle. It was supposed to happen. Earlier in the video, I talked about how I believe Kylo Ren, Rey, and Finn make the new trio for the sequel trilogy. And the other part of that I wanted to talk about was that each of these characters experience an awakening throughout the movie. And what's kind of funny is that they experience their awakenings in the order in which they remove their masks. So for Finn, he removes his mask first. He experiences his awakening during the attack on the village when he realizes what the First Order is doing is wrong, and he's resolved to leave the First Order based on moral principle. And then Rey, she unmasks herself second. And you could say that her awakening is somewhat incremental. It comes in stages. But I believe her true awakening happens in the interrogation scene with Kylo Ren, because that is when she fully awakens to her Force sensitivity. And then Kylo Ren unmasks himself third, and I guess you could, some may disagree on whether or not he has an awakening at all. I believe he does, because he mentions earlier in the movie that he sensed an awakening in the Force, and I believe that his awakening comes when he's trying to call the blue lightsaber to him, and it goes to Rey instead. The expression on his face is just complete and utter awe. Prior to the lightsaber going to Rey, he expressed fascination and interest in Rey, but in this moment, I think he realizes that the Force has brought him and Rey together, that they are bound through the Force, and that their destinies are intertwined. And I just realized this too, but there's an interesting parallel between Rey's and Kylo Ren's awakenings. Their awakenings take place directly after they both reject the hero's call to action. Rey's call to action is on Takodana when Maz tries to give the lightsaber to her and she rejects it, and then runs into the forest. Immediately after that, she confronts Kylo Ren, and then is taken back to Starkiller Base, where in the interrogation room she experiences her full awakening to her Force abilities. I think in this moment she realizes that despite her earlier conceptions of herself, that she's not a nobody, that she is someone of importance, and that she has these powers that she doesn't quite understand. And then even though Kylo Ren isn't the hero of this story, it is interesting how that in some ways you could look at his interaction with Han and then Han's death as his rejection to the call to action, in terms of leaving the First Order behind. And then immediately afterwards he runs into the forest to confront Finn and Rey, and then experiences his awakening with watching his lightsaber, or his old lightsaber, going to Rey instead of him. And then in that moment realizing that the Force is guiding him in the right direction, and that he should listen to that. So here we have two characters where Rey discovers that she's not a nobody, that she does have a purpose and a future, and a path to pursue, but then also the same with Kylo Ren. He in some ways discovers his purpose. He discovers his path. And through these realizations, they each become more fully realized as characters, because they gain a better sense of which direction or which path they should take. It's also interesting how after their rejection to the call to action, that they both run into a forest. Rey runs into the forest on Takodana, and then Kylo Ren chases Finn and Rey into the forest on Starkiller Base. Also, they both experience their awakenings with each other. At least this is my perspective of the story. Obviously, if you have a different interpretation of what happens in the movie, that's totally cool. In terms of how Rey will, positively influence Kylo Ren and play a role in a possible redemption arc, I've kind of touched on that already in terms of how the Force is bringing them together. They have shared destinies, parallel paths, etc. Um, I think that it's not going to be this thing where, Rey is influencing Kylo Ren positively and where she remains static and he's, developing as a character. I think that because they're two sides of the same coin, so to speak, that they will develop in relation to each other. It's going to be more of a mutual two-way type deal. And I think in terms of like how, I think in some ways she's positively influenced him in the sense that the way that she uses the Force. Rey is kind of an anomaly to Kylo Ren in the sense that she grew up in isolation on a desert planet and, appears to be kind of, that she doesn't have a significant bloodline. Whereas Kylo Ren is this heir to a legacy much larger than himself, and is even a prince. But despite these things, he finds an equal in her. And then on top of that, she appears to be a balance of the dark and the light as well, even though she operates from the light side and is motivated by love and loyalty for close friends. She uses techniques that resemble more of, how a dark side user would channel the Force. And I think that that contradicts Snoke's teachings of the Force as being this very black and white thing where you have to be one or the other. I think it contradicts traditional teachings of the Force in general, even if those teachings came from the light side. And I think it's important to note that Rey really can't have a positive influence on him without his consent. Meaning that that desire to grow and to evolve in response to her influence is really going to be up to him. It's his responsibility. And I think so far we see that he's actually very receptive to her because he's constantly chasing her and she's running away from him. I think that this is a good lesson for women out there that when a guy's interested, you'll definitely know because he won't leave you alone. And sure, there are a lot of parallels to stories like Beauty and the Beast and Phantom of the Opera with Reylo, but these stories are, you find the same thing with these two stories. Initially, both the Beast and the Phantom were motivated more by selfish reasons in their pursuit of Christine and Belle. They believed that the love of these women, or obtaining the love of these women would save them from themselves. And really what happened in the end is that what they were really redeemed by was the love that they had for the women. The Beast comes to realize how much he loves Belle, and instead of keeping her as a prisoner, he lets her go so that she can tend to her father. The Beast's selfless love for Belle is really what made the Beast a better person. And so even though he, aesthetically remained a beast for the time being, he, on the inside, became someone much more human and relatable. And the same goes for the Phantom. The Phantom pursued Christine obsessively and, committed murder and blackmail, in order to get her to love him back. And really what he found in the end is that when she ultimately does agree to be with him, that it wasn't her choice, and that's not how he wanted it to be. So he lets her go, knowing that that will make her truly happy. And because because of his selfless love for Christine, he became a better person. I'm not really saying that this is how Kylo Ren and Rey will go. I'm just saying that that when male characters are redeemed because of a romantic, kind of a love interest, usually it's his choice. He chooses to be redeemed, and he chooses to act in a selfless way. In other words, his redemption is his responsibility. So just as a wrap-up, I think if Kylo Ren were to receive a redemption arc, or just character development in general, which obviously he's going to with 2 movies left in a trilogy, that's just a given. But I think that to achieve self-actualization, he will need to overthrow the false father figure of Snoke and accept the true one of Han. I think that Han's death scene will play a crucial role in his development, in Kylo Ren's development as a character, because Han's demonstration of unconditional love and forgiveness will cause Kylo Ren to reflect on his past decisions, and will, and I think that it will make him reassess things. That's as much in depth as I can go at this point because I just have the one movie, so it will be interesting to see how that pans out in the next one. In terms of how Rey will influence Kylo Ren, I think that they will mutually influence each other through the Force. I think that Rey represents a balance of both the light and the dark, which I think that he can relate to. He's found an equal in Rey. And because they have, they're traveling these parallel paths, I think that they will continue to find that they have more in common with each other and will have further opportunities to, to grow in response to each other. Also, Rey is a tough-ass chick, so she's not going to take any of Kylo Ren's bullshit. She's going to put him in his place and tell him what he needs to hear when he needs to hear it. And in some cases, she's already done that, throughout The Force Awakens. You know, and instead of him throwing a tantrum over it or seeming threatened, he actually has seemed humbled by the experience. Which tells me that in the next movie, he's most likely going to modify his approach to her. In terms of whether or not she'll save him, I think that a lot of that comes down to his choice. I think that his actions and his possible redemption, any development that he goes through as a character, those things are his responsibility. So Rey could have a great influence on him, but the only way that that can really amount to anything is if he is receptive to her influence and chooses to, chooses to embrace that. So thank you so much for watching my video. If you want to share your thoughts, feel free to do so as long as you remain respectful. If you have any suggestions for things that you would like me to discuss in future videos, please feel free to share. I do have a few ideas that I would like to, that I'd like to turn into videos, but I kind of just, I make videos as, kind of as I go. Like, I don't have a set schedule for it. But again, thank you so much for watching, and thanks to everybody who liked and commented my last two videos. That just means a lot to me, especially where, video, or recording your voice and putting it on the internet is a little daunting. So yeah, have a great night, and thanks. Bye.